everybody. Welcome to Police Off the Cuff. This is a special edition, Real Crime Stories. This is specifically for our Patreon customers. We put this on Patreon. People pay to actually see us, right? So we put this on Patreon for 2 weeks. They get their fill of this great story, and then we put it out on Anchor, and all the masses can hear these great real crime stories. Today, I have an amazing guest. He's actually a retired detective. His name is Tim Muldoon. He's a third-generation NYPD. He did 20 years on the job. He retired as a second-grade detective. For some reason, he got promoted, and a month later retired. I don't even want to hear that story. That's not why.
Well, it was a 12-year wait for the second grade, so.
So you waited for a long time, so it was more or less sticking up the department's ass. So yeah, you're gonna promote me 1 month to 20 years. I'm leaving. You know? That's his story. Anyway, he started out in the 4-6 precinct. Very busy precinct at that time. All right. Went to narcotics. Wound up in the DEA task force.
On loan,
and then he wound up in the 3-4 squad, which there was no busier place in the city in the 90s. It was a rock and roll, and talk about a busy precinct. And then at the end of his career, he wound up in Manhattan North Homicide Squad.
that's right.
You know something, I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Bill Cannon, obviously the host of this show. I'm a retired sergeant from Manhattan North Homicide Squad, but Tim and I were in the Homicide Squad during different eras. Anyway, enough background on this. Tim, welcome to the show. And today you're going to talk about a homicide that occurred up in the 3-4 precinct in, I believe it was 1991.
91, yeah. And the time period is significant. But I just want to point out that when I was in the 4-6, we led the city in homicides. And when I was in the 3-4 squad, we led the city in homicides. So I don't know if I wasn't doing my job or what.
I think you may have like a bit of a black cloud over you.
I think so.
And you know, the other funny thing, just a little aside, is that Edmund Hartnett, the former Yonkers police commissioner and NYPD chief, was your partner for a while in the 4-6.
That's right. I described myself as his launch pad, and reached the heights.
Did they call that the Dublin card? The 2 Irish guys riding in the,
Oh yeah. Well, you know what? Back in those days, the older guys remembered Car 54.
Yeah.
So he was Tootie, I was Muldoon. So
Car 54, where are you? That's right.
Exactly. But yeah, I went on to bigger and better things. And although my wife used to give me the business, she'd say every 6 months he was being promoted. You big loser, you know.
He's a good test taker, you know.
Oh, he's a good man.
Smart guy.
Totally. Yeah. So anyway, so back to the case. So anyway, this case occurred in August of 1991. And that's significant. I'll explain later why that time period is significant, specifically to this case. But also, I just want to kind of explain a little bit about Washington Heights back in 1991. Because sometimes I hear, guys talk about, Bensonhurst or this and that. And I'm a New York City guy, but like, I don't know Bensonhurst, I don't know Canarsie, so just in case somebody doesn't know about the physical location of Washington Heights, I just want to explain that it's from the 150s in Manhattan, Upper Manhattan, to like the 190s, river to river. And if you're really from out of town, if you ever cross the George Washington Bridge and come into New York, that's Washington Heights. So Washington Heights was predominantly Dominican. There were pockets of old Irish, old Jewish residents, some of whom were Holocaust survivors. But unfortunately, the Heights was known primarily, legendarily, as the birthplace of crack. And whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it was definitely where crack took hold and took off. And
well, geographically, the precinct was perfect for that, because people come across the George Washington Bridge, they want to buy their drugs and fly back into New Jersey. And,
yes.
And on the other side, there was the Deegan Expressway.
Right.
There was so many ways to reach the Heights.
And even
from the Bronx, you could just come south via Broadway, right?
Yep. And if you were moving weight, it was connected to all the major highways.
Right.
It was really it was a prime location. But and then what happened was the crack epidemic came to really dominate Washington Heights and the 3-4 precinct specifically, and which was unfortunate because there was a lot of people, they are trying to live the American dream, but unfortunately the streets were taken over by the drug dealers. So that was And also in 1991, I think we actually led the city in homicides that year with 122. So it was really quite the place. So on the weekend that this event occurred, I'd actually spent the weekend in Washington with my family. We were visiting Washington, D.C. and Georgetown and like that. And this was a Monday. I returned to work and I dropped my family off and I went straight to work. And there was like a lull in the action. I remember there was a kind of a quiet Monday. And I remember the Giants were playing a preseason game and I was able to duck in now and again and take a look at that and just kind of enjoying the rare quiet moment. And with that, three people came into the office to report their friend Deborah missing. And I should add, like, even though there were three, like, I guess we would call them yuppies at the time.
Yuppies.
I
got that word, yuppie.
Yeah, because occasionally there was like
Now there's much worse. Now there's something called millennials.
Oh my God, there's like
yuppies. All the implication of being a millennial. Participation trophies,
Oh my God, and how. But the 3-4 also would experience at times would be like a little gentrification burst, and it would never last. But there'd be some people there. So anyway,
we used to call them pioneers, right? They'd come there in the
homesteaders.
The covered wagons, and the arrows would go shot through their.
Yep. So anyway, there was 2 guys and a woman came in to report their friend Deborah missing. So this is Monday evening. They told me that their friend, the last time they had contacted with her was on Thursday night. She never reported to work on Friday. And I think one of the women was her friend and her supervisor at work. So they thought it was, of course they're concerned, and they had spent the weekend trying to contact her and looking for her, et cetera, actually physically looking for her. And anyway, I asked, how old is she? I think she was 38.
Yeah.
Was she mentally, physically sound? And not only was she mentally sound, she was actually going for a PhD in psychology, which kind of turns out to be ironic. And so as you know, as you remember, a missing person, that would qualify as a missing personal informational. And the way those were handled back in that day anyway was you'd call to make sure she wasn't hospitalized, you'd call to make sure she wasn't incarcerated, you'd contact missing persons, and ultimately that was the end of it. And if a person was...
Let me just stop you for a second, though.
Yeah.
There's one of the things on the police department that you could really, really get jammed up for, and that's not treating a missing person case with the kind of attention that it deserves.
Right.
And people that aren't in this business, aren't police, they have to understand the police get missing person cases every single day. And basically, if you're over 18, you're emancipated, you're allowed to go about your business, and if you don't come home one night and your parents or someone wants to report you missing, you're not necessarily missing unless other factors exist and you can tell.
Exactly right. And in this case, the one thing that really stuck in my mind was, the fact that somebody's missing for a couple of days. I mean, we see it all the time. It's payday, whoop, they're gone, whatever it might be, romance, whatever it might be. And but the thing that struck me was that Deborah's mother and sister-in-law, who lived in California, were flying in. So that kind of really got my attention. Like, that was obviously, this was exceptional behavior for her. So when I questioned these 3 folks about what was going on, they mentioned that she lived on Hillside Avenue and that she was subletting a room in her apartment to a young fellow who's a computer programmer. Mm-hmm. So I asked, where is he? So they said he's sick. Otherwise he would have been here. So I said, give me the number. I'll give him a call. So I call him up and I said, when's the last time you heard from Deborah? And he was kind of somewhat vague. So I said, be a little more specific. He said, well, I heard her come in on Thursday night. So I said, was she alone? Was she speaking to anyone? Did you hear additional footsteps? And he hesitates and he says, no. So I said, is that an honest answer? And he hesitates again and he says, yes. So now I'm thinking maybe one of these guys has a romantic relationship with Deborah and he knows I'm with them and he doesn't want to say this on the phone. So I, hang up. That's the end of that. These people go on their way. And
now at this point, were you thinking that this was suspicious or this was a special category missing person?
Not necessarily. Well, I guess it was in the fact that the mother was coming in. If that happened, and in fact, she was gone for several days too. But that wasn't that unusual actually either, to have somebody missing for several.
Oh, you don't know her, so yeah, you know.
Yeah. So, but anyway, I just said, you know what? I went to my colleague Joe Monturi, who I just want to kind of explain, you know, Joe, he's a great guy and a grader and had a lot of time on the job. And the fact that missing personal information is such low priority, many times if you went to somebody with some sort of stature and you said, hey, would you go out with me on a missing person informational? He might
like, no way.
Yeah. But the beautiful thing about Joe was, even though he was a superstar, he never minded getting down and doing the grunt work, you know?
Right.
The canvas, he'd write that.
Hey, that's part of being a detective. You got to get your hands dirty, right?
That's it.
That's how you got there in the first place. What are you going to now all of a sudden, you're just going to dine at certain hours? And, you know.
That's true. So Joe and I drove off to Hillside. And when we walked into the lobby of the building, I noticed a very, very slight scent of a decomposing body, a DOA. But
that was in the vestibule? Or?
In the vestibule.
Yeah.
And I said to Joe, as a joke, I said, "Oh, there's her body. This is put to bed." And but like I said, it was very, very slight. It wasn't, you know, overpowering. It could have been anything really, but I just got that sense. So we go up to the apartment, and Julian answers the door, and he's not sick.
And Julian is the roommate.
The roommate.
Okay.
The guy who's subletting the room, and he's not sick. So that kind of raises me up. I came to find out later he in fact had been sick, and whatever he had broken before we got there. So even though that raised my suspicion level, it turned out not to be, you know, an accurate reason for it.
Yes.
So anyway, he lets us into the apartment. He's very cooperative, and actually, when we enter the apartment, there's a very strong odor of aerosol, air freshener, that kind of thing.
Something that's trying to mask the smell of the.
Right, and again, there's like a hint, a very slight hint of maybe a DOA smell, but I'm not really, you know.
Once you get a smell of what a DOA smells like, it stays with you forever.
Yeah, that's a fact. And, you know, there's no forgetting it, that's for sure, you're right.
No.
And so at any rate, he's very cooperative. You know, we asked, you know, can we see her luggage as if she took a trip? You know, can we look in her medicine cabinet in case she in fact has some sort of issues that other people don't know about? And, again, like I said, he's been very cooperative. I go into her room, and coincidentally, she was reading the same book. It was on her night table that I was reading at that time. And it was the name of a book called Killing Mr. Watson. And when this all shook out the way it eventually does, my wife, who's from Thailand and Buddhist, insisted that was her trying to connect to me.
Oh, good.
So who knows, maybe. So at any rate, like I say, he's totally cooperative. It's all good. We leave the apartment. Now we go down into the basement. Now we go to the lobby again, but there's no smell any longer. So we go into the basement and we look through the basement, trying to find the source of the original smell, and nothing. So we start to leave the building, and we're standing on the front steps. And this is where the time period becomes maybe some significance. So a week before that, Jeffrey Dahmer had been arrested in Milwaukee and ultimately charged with killing 17 young men. And if you remember that case, there was an incident where one of the young men escaped from him, and the cops returned the young guy.
Right, yeah, no, that was horrendous. Yeah, that was horrendous.
Right. So the thought of dropping the ball and it just made me more keen on pursuing this further.
Well, you better do a thorough investigation on this.
Right, and I turned to Joe and I said, "Listen, man." Oh, I'm sorry. So to back up, in terms of the odor in the apartment, Joe asked him about it, and he said, "Oh, I haven't been cleaning up after her cats. They made a mess. You know, I'm trying to make up for it now, but I'm playing catch up." So all right, that flies, you know. So, but now we're on the front steps, and I said to Joe, I said, "I don't know about cat crap, but I know about DOAs. Let's go back to the apartment." So we go back upstairs, and he lets us in again, and we're just talking to him, whatever. But now there's his room, and Joe says to him, "What's in here?" He says, "Oh, that's my bedroom." So Joe says, "Can we look inside?" So he says, "Yeah." So we open the door, we go in. So you know how just your standard procedure. So now Joe's actually doing a search of the bed, looking around the bedroom. So I'm standing by the door of the bedroom with this guy, just, you know, standard procedure. You know, you're trained for that, and you just do it automatically.
Sure.
So Joe goes behind the bed, and he pulls up this duffel bag, and he says to the guy, "What's in here?" And the guy says, dirty laundry, wet towels, things like that. So Joe says, "Can I look inside?" So the guy says, yeah. But with that, like in a movie, the guy starts sweating. So I'm standing and look at this guy. I'm like, whoa. So again, I'm not really getting it. Joe puts his hand in the bag. Now this was August. It had been a serious heat wave that weekend. Joe puts his hand in the bag and it comes out covered with this brown fluid. And Joe, we used to call him Steve McQueen, but now I call him the image of Steve McQueen because I found out Steve McQueen's really an a-hole. But Joe pulls out his hand, doesn't say anything, walks out of the bedroom, down the hall into the kitchen. So now me and Julian step out of the bedroom together, and we're both watching Joe wash his hands very nonchalantly, as if he does this every day of the week. But again, now Julian is really starting. You can really see panic is setting in.
Yeah.
So Joe, we enter the room. Joe brings the duffel bag around to where we're standing, and he says, "Oh, he doesn't say anything. He just takes the bag and he dumps it. And inside is a square object that's wrapped in garbage bags, but it's like a rectangular, maybe 2.5 feet by 1.5 feet, something like that. And when it hits the ground, the floor, it twists ever so slightly. And the image of the statue of Venus de Milo enters my mind. And I'm like, holy moly. I'm really in shock. I'm like, and the thing falls on its side, and now the guy's really streaming. I'm going for my gun. I'm going for Joe's cuffs. Joe cuts the bag open, and now you can see the flesh. And Joe says to the guy, what's this? He says it's her torso. The rest of it's in the garbage in the basement.
Wow.
Yeah. So naturally we put him in custody.
Now, did that become a big, was that an interrogation when you asked him that question?
No, it never was a problem, because I tell you about you, because we went to, of course, suppression hearings, right?
Yes.
And when I testified, as I'm speaking to you all these years later, and it was probably came across more clearly then, I was like in shock, frankly. So it was clearly, this was not an interrogation. This was, this was not a.
But Joe asked him, what is that?
Yeah, well, I don't know. It was never. I mean,
I'm just, the question that they would always ask: was he free to go at that point? Was he under arrest at that point?
Of course he wasn't. But we, of course, it's funny, in thinking about this case, this guy ended up with a great defense attorney, a great Manhattan defense attorney whose name I cannot recall. And so we actually went to a suppression hearing with that guy. And if you get through something with this fellow, you're good to go.
Right.
Well, yeah, believe me, it was examined. But so anyway, so at that point, we take him into custody. I returned to the precinct with him. Joe stayed on the scene, and now this is all I'm being told, they contact emergency service and they contact crime scene. One amazing thing too at this point to know of, I should say, the mother and the brother-in-law had arrived in New York already through the LaGuardia, and they were driving to the apartment. And the mother turned to the brother-in-law, her son-in-law, and said, "I've got a bad feeling. Let's not go to the apartment. Let's go to the hotel," which was a blessing, because what happened was emergency service was going through the piles of, so I don't know if I mentioned that. So from the time we went into the building, into the apartment, and got bound to the basement, the super had taken the garbage out of the building. So when we came in, we smelled the garbage.
Wow.
The apartment, everything gets removed. We go back down there's nothing there. So everything's in front of the building. How they are, those big buildings, is dozens of bags of garbage.
Sure.
So emergency service comes to the scene, and now they're going through the bags trying to find all the body parts. So we have the torso, and we know where that is, but all the other parts are missing. So they actually start laying the body parts out on the sidewalk, which I say is a blessing that the mother didn't show up.
Yeah, that's not a great New York moment.
Well, what they did though, they actually tried to cover the view.
Yeah.
And but everybody was on rooftops, and
of course there's cameras all over the place. Even
but
back
thank God it was a little bit before that, so that was not such an issue. But I said, thankfully, the mother had this instinct not to come to the actual location, because that would have been a real disaster.
Yeah.
Yeah. So at any rate, I went back to the precinct with Julian. Joel Potter joined me, And we spoke for 6.5, 7 hours, from about 11:30 at night to about 6 in the morning. And he ended up giving me, I actually have a copy of the statement here, and not because I'm ghoulish, but a professor friend of mine would sometimes invite us to speak at his school, and this was a case I would do, so I actually made a copy of the statement, but it's 14 legal pages long.
Wow.
Yeah, and we
How old was this perpetrator?
22. He was. That's another thing I want to mention too. He was 22 years old. He was a computer programmer. He was from. I don't think he was from Jamaica. He was Jamaican, but I don't think he was from Jamaica. And if I had spoken to this guy, like say if I had suspected this woman was missing as a result of a homicide, if I had spoken to him at all, I would have just eliminated him immediately. He just, if there's a type, he was not it.
He was not the type, yeah.
Perform. And even in the following the incarcerating him, there was something about him. He wasn't cold like a psychopath or something, but there was some sort of disconnect where he showed no empathy, no remorse at all for what he had done, or no empathy for Deborah, who was his roommate.
How was Deborah initially killed?
Okay, so in this statement, she was stabbed to death. But in his statement, he initially describes their fatal encounter in a particular way, which I think he just reversed the roles. He made it sound like almost like a self-defense, and I'll go into that. And then once he got past the point where she was dead, the statement, I'm sure, was 100% accurate. But the way he described it was that he was in the shower and that she came in and wanted to use the shower, was aggravated that he was in there so long. And she told him to get out. I want to use the shower. And he said that he still took his time. And that when he came out, she was waiting for him with a knife. And he said she came at him with a knife, and said he ran into her room. And
so he's basically switching roles. He's
totally
blaming on her what he actually did.
Totally. And
was this going to be or a sex crime?
Oh, it was I think it was a sexual assault to start with.
That's what I'm saying. Did it start out as a sexual assault?
That's what I think, and because he described how when he was wrestling with her for the knife, how his towel dropped off.
Yeah.
How he was holding her in a certain way. So it really indicated to me that was what was going on. And then he said that they struggled over the knife, and she was stabbed several times, and that the knife finally ended up in her throat.
Yeah, I hate how that happens,
And then she said to him, "Now look what you've done."
Yeah.
And she collapsed to the floor, and she passed. And he ended up sitting there with her for hours, or it would seem like hours, because he said by the time he kind of came to his senses, he was afraid of the blood going out of the apartment under the door, or going through the floor. There was that much. So at that point, he gets the bright idea that he's gonna get rid of the body by burning it. So he takes her and he puts her in a bathtub, and he surrounds her with newspapers, and he lights it on fire.
Oh my God.
So, and the thing that was incredible was, as he's going through this statement, the whole thing is, what a problem I have. Look at me. I got this problem. I got this dead body. Forget the dead body. It's just
right. Forget that he just killed a human being. Right?
Yeah. So he starts this fire, and of course, it makes all sorts of smoke and whatnot. And the super ends up coming to the door, and I think there was somebody else with the super. And he tells the super he left something on the stove and it burned, and that's that. And it was funny because later the super was interviewed on the news, like a couple of days later, and he was going on about how he knew this and he knew that, et cetera, et cetera.
He didn't know anything. Yeah.
He was helping him fan the apartment out, So he was waving the door back and forth. So he tried that. I actually made a list of the things that on that day he tried the let's see. So he tried the newspapers on that day. He tried it again. It didn't. It just made things worse. Now he's got burnt up shower curtains. He's got soot all over the place. It's a mess. And then he gets a phone call from one of the fellows who came to the precinct, who's flying in from California, unrelated to anything, who Deborah had given him permission to spend the weekend in her apartment.
Oh God.
So now he's got somebody's coming to the apartment to stay on Friday. Also at this time, the phone's ringing.
But you can't use the tub though.
Well, and also at this time, the phone is ringing like crazy, or work, or friends,
Yeah.
that. And so it was, so anyway, he tries to get rid of the body, tries to clean it up. Now people start coming over. And I actually went through the statement, and just Friday alone, 5 people came to the apartment, 3 of whom came in and had a beer with the guy and everything else. And it's just, including the guy who was going to spend the weekend.
That sounds like a psychopath, that could do that. That
Yeah.
he
You know,
has
the
like
funny
no
thing is,
ego. He just pretends like nothing's happened.
yeah. Well, and the funny thing was, like, when he was describing trying to dispose of the body, I said to him, I said, have you ever done anything like this before? He says to me, no, I hate violence. Okay. But so at any rate, he tried that on Friday, and then on, let's see, Saturday, let me say, like I said, I actually went through the statement. He bought WD-40 and rubbing alcohol, and he tried to burn those 2 things to see if they would make an intense enough flame, and that didn't work. But you have to picture it, during this whole time, people are coming and going from the apartment, staying. Like at one point, a family comes over with 2 kids, and they're watching TV.
Oh God.
And here's this body in the apartment. He's bringing it back and forth from the tub to his bedroom and back and forth. So he decides that he's got a little bit of time, and the answer is gasoline. And he tells me that he's envisioning. Remember during the Vietnam War, the protesters, the monks would burn themselves in protest.
Yes, yeah.
So he says he's envisioning that, and he imagines if he uses the gasoline, that he'll just have a skeleton to dispose of. So he goes and he gets a gallon of gas.
I guess this was before all these shows like Forensic Files and all of this stuff.
Oh yeah, totally.
Many years before all of that,
Yes. So he goes and he gets a gallon of gas, and he puts her in the tub, and he pours some gasoline on. And when he lights it, as you might know, the fumes will ignite, not just the gasoline. That's how we get half our arsonists get caught. They set them.
Yeah.
So he lights it, and it flashes on him, and he tells me, I got singed, I almost got burned. He's telling me this, and what non-police have to remember or be made aware of, when you're talking to somebody like this all night, in your mind you're saying, what a nut, violent bag of crap.
Yeah.
But you're conveying to him total sympathy,
Oh yeah. This is normal. Yeah.
Yeah.
You thought that. Yeah.
I wish you knew. I wish you told me. I would have told you the gasoline would. Like, what the frig? So again, like I said, people are coming and going. I won't go all the detail, but he's jockeying her back and forth. So on Sunday, he decides the way to do it is with a power saw, and he goes out and he buys one, and he comes back, and it was, I hate to I won't get too graphic, but, I asked him, I said, what did you take off first? He said, funny you should ask me that, because I was thinking about that. Like, it was this big dilemma. And when he finally decided to try to take off a limb, when the saw hit, now, of course, she's been dead since Friday morning. It's Sunday. It's been very, very hot all weekend.
Oh, God.
So when he hits her with the saw, he says to me, I ruined my sneakers. You're like, you poor son of a gun.
Oh my God.
How in the world did you get by? So he ends up dismembering it. And even that, I don't want to get too graphic, but just out of respect to Deborah, but he starts giving me a lesson on making pieces small enough that you can manage them. And he's talking as if he's on a cooking show, like, and then you do this and do that. I'm like, well, thank you for that insight. It's really, but the funny thing was, as I mentioned earlier, we had spent the weekend in Washington, D.C., and I took a really detailed statement from him, very specific about when and where and how. And as he's describing setting her on fire, I'm thinking at that very moment, I'm at the Lincoln Memorial.
Yeah.
He's describing chopping this off. And I'm thinking, I was at the Washington. It was just bizarre to have this parallel weekend running with his.
No, it's amazing how something this horrendous, we just take that as part of our job, as part of what we do, part of the investigative process. But this is definitely a PTSD event, for anyone that we think about this years later,
Yeah. Well, it's funny. A friend of mine, I went to camp with, very good friends with Eddie Hardnett and myself, my friend Barry Laddick, and he ended up a detective like in the 17th and whatnot. Great friend. And then we ended up working together after we retired in the Board of Ed together as investigators. And one day we were sitting there and he turned to me and he said, "You know you're effed up, right?" And I said, "Probably what makes you say that?" He said, "You couldn't be where you were for all those years and not be effed up."
Right. Yeah. Well,
who knows? Maybe he's right.